The palace glows beneath 1,000 lamps. Golden torches flicker against marble walls as musicians play in the courtyards of Topkapi. The Bosphorus is calm tonight, reflecting the celebration like a mirror of stars. Everywhere, the scent of rosewater lingers. Servants hurry through corridors carrying trays of silver and silk. The empire's mightiest men stand in attendance, whispering blessings for a union meant to bind two worlds, power and peace. At the center of it all stands Mihrimah Sultan, daughter of Suleiman the Magnificent, and Hurrem Sultan, the most powerful woman the Ottoman court has ever known. She is only 17, dressed in a gown of crimson silk threaded with pearls. Her face, witnesses said, was serene, but her eyes, they carried the weight of something unsaid. Tonight, she is to be wed to Rustam Pasha, her father's Grand Vizier, a man twice her age, a soldier who rose from nothing to stand beside the throne. For Suleiman, this marriage is a strategy. For Rustam, it is triumph. For Mihrimah, it is destiny, or a sentence. The drums of the Meter band echo through the courtyards as the ceremony begins. Chroniclers record the night with lavish detail, jewels gifted by foreign ambassadors, ships illuminated along the shore, and the sound of cannon fire saluting the imperial union. But as the night deepens, something changes. Servants notice the Sultan leaving early, his expression unreadable. Hurrem Sultan lingers near the bridal pavilion longer than expected, whispering to her daughter before departing. One account, preserved in the archives of Topkapi Palace Museum, TSMA D 1253, mentions an unease among the women of the harem, though the record gives no reason. By midnight, the palace quiets. The guests depart. The candles burn low. Mihrimah is escorted to her chambers, followed by her attendants and Rustam's guards. The great doors close behind her. And then, nothing. No sound, no witness, no record of what happened next. When dawn arrives, the Grand Vizier's guards stand waiting outside the bridal suite. Inside, there is silence. The attendants are missing. The bed is untouched. The Sultan's daughter, gone. By morning, Suleiman issues his first command. Seal the chambers. No one enters. No one speaks. From that moment, the story of Mihrimah Sultan ceases to appear in official imperial registers for several weeks. An absence in the most recorded court in the Islamic world. Historians like Leslie Pierce have long debated this strange gap. Some believe it was nothing, a clerical omission. Others suspect something darker, a cover-up born from shame, scandal, or betrayal. The Venetian ambassador Jas letters from 1539 mention a disturbance in the palace during the celebrations, and that Her Majesty's daughter was not seen afterward. The letter is vague, likely censored, but it confirms what the Ottoman court tried to erase. As the sun rises over Topkapi, the imperial banners flutter over a palace holding its breath. The Sultan's bride has vanished, and with her a secret the empire would bury for centuries. If you've made it this far into the mystery, you're one of the few who still search for what history tried to hide. Stay with me, because what happened after this night only grows darker. Before she became a mystery, she was a miracle. Born in 1522, Mihrimah Sultan entered a world of golden crescents and sharpened blades, a palace ruled by her father as absolute power and her mother as dangerous intelligence. From the moment of her birth, she was not just a child, she was a symbol. The daughter of Suleiman the Magnificent, the lawgiver, the conqueror of Europe, and of Hurrem Sultan, the enslaved woman who had defied every tradition to become queen. Together, they represented the empire's heart, law and passion, order and intrigue. And Mihrimah was the bridge between them. She grew up behind silk screens and lattice windows, listening to the empire's heartbeat through whispers and footsteps. Her tutors came from across the world, scholars from Persia, artists from Venice, philosophers from Cairo. She could read Arabic poetry, debate theology in Persian, and write elegant Ottoman Turkish. Chroniclers described her as a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's mind. But beauty and brilliance were both dangerous in the Ottoman court. Every gesture, every word, could ripple through the palace like a blade in the dark. The harem was not merely a home, it was a battlefield dressed in perfume, and Mihrimah was Hurrem's greatest weapon. When she reached adolescence, Hurrem began weaving her daughter into the empire's politics. Marriage alliances were her chessboard, and Mihrimah was the queen's most valuable piece. Ambassadors wrote to their kings that the princess possessed both intellect and ambition rare among women of the Orient. There were rumors that Hurrem intended to marry her daughter to one of the most powerful princes of the empire, perhaps even Shehzadeh Mustafa, Suleiman's beloved son and heir. But that would have united the empire under one unstoppable family. And that, to the men who feared Hurrem's influence, was unthinkable. So a different plan took shape. When Rustem Pasha, a soldier from Croatia, once a stable boy, now rising in Suleiman's court, proved his loyalty through brilliance and brutality, the Sultan saw in him a man who could serve both power and control. He was rewarded not only with rank, but with a bride, Mihrimah Sultan. It was the ultimate political marriage, designed to bind Rustam's loyalty and keep Hurrem's ambitions in check. But to many in the court, it was a betrayal. Letters from Venetian envoy Bernardo Navaggero describe unrest in the harem following the announcement. The women murmured that the princess, though obedient, had wept when told of her fate. It was said her mother spoke long with her that night, urging her to accept what destiny decreed. Still, Mihrimah obeyed. She had no choice. Her father's word was divine law. And so, the girl who had once read Rumi beneath the cypress trees of the palace gardens found herself engaged to a man she barely knew, a man whose ambitions ran deeper than anyone realized. Historians note that her dowry was among the richest ever given by a sultan: gold, silks, and lands across Rumelia. But nowhere in the record is there mention of a dowry of peace or happiness. As the wedding approached, Hurrem herself took charge of every detail: the gown, the musicians, even the scent of the incense to be burned in the bridal chamber. It was to be the grandest wedding the Ottoman world had ever seen. Yet, beneath all that splendor, the palace grew restless. The eunuchs whispered that omens had been seen in the sky. The astrologers warned of a conjunction that foretold union turned to ash. But no one dared delay the Sultan's will. The date was set, May 26, 1539. The night history recorded as a triumph, and remembered as a disappearance. History hides its cruelest truths behind official records, and when the empire wanted something forgotten, it buried it in silence. If you're still watching, you're already among those who want to dig deeper. Stay with me, because what follows will test even the Sultan's own bloodline. The city of Istanbul had never seen such a spectacle. From the shores of Üsküdar to the domes of Süleymaniye, the empire glittered in celebration. Poets wrote of a night brighter than the moon, when the daughter of the Sultan would become the bride of the Grand Vizier. But for those within the palace, it was not joy that filled the air. It was tension. For weeks before the ceremony, a quiet unease had spread through the imperial harem. The women who dressed Mihrimah whispered of bad dreams, of mirrors that cracked without touch, of lamps that refused to stay lit. Even the chief eunuch, a man known for his composure, was said to have prayed longer than usual on the day of the wedding. Still, the drums began to sound at sunset. A procession of silk and gold wound through the palace courtyard. Mihrimah was carried beneath a canopy embroidered with verses from the Quran, symbols of purity and fate. Behind her walked Hurrem Sultan, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped tightly around a talisman said to have come from her homeland. At her side, Rustam Pasha waited, draped in brocade, his beard oiled and dark. To the crowd, he looked like the image of victory, a common man who had risen to the Sultan's inner circle. But those who watched closely saw something else, a flicker of fear in his eyes. The wedding feast lasted until midnight. Musicians played until their fingers bled. Jesters performed for the courtiers, and ships on the Bosphorus lit their decks in flame. Yet amid the noise, there were whispers that the Sultan himself had withdrawn early, after a brief exchange with his wife. What was said between Suleiman and Hürrem that night remains a mystery. The chronicler Selaniki Mustafa Effendi would later note, "The Padishah's face was grave, and Her Majesty's eyes shone not with joy but with worry. By the time the revelers began to fade, only a few torches still burned in the courtyard. The princess was escorted by her attendants, 3 women sworn to secrecy, to the bridal pavilion, a private chamber built overlooking the gardens. That was the last anyone saw of her alive." When the morning call to prayer echoed across the Bosphorus, the doors to her chamber remained shut. Rustam's guards waited outside, as custom demanded, until a servant entered to announce the couple's waking. But the room was silent. Inside, the bed was untouched. The curtains stirred, though the windows were closed. One of the attendants' veils was found on the floor, stained with what the record calls a dark mark not of ink. By sunrise, the chamber was sealed. No one was permitted to enter. The official statement claimed that the princess was taken to a private retreat by order of the Sultan. But the rumor spread faster than the empire could contain it. The Sultan's bride had vanished on her wedding night. In the days that followed, the palace operated as if nothing had happened. The feasts continued. The court poets wrote verses celebrating the union, and Rustam Pasha resumed his duties as if married life had begun. Yet, within the harem, silence fell like mourning. The eunuchs were forbidden to speak of it. The women who had attended Mihrima were quietly dismissed or reassigned to distant palaces. And in one surviving document, TSMAE 438-7, a note in the Sultan's own cipher, an order reads, "No report shall be written of the princess's movements until instructed by my own hand." No further record of her location exists for 3 weeks. Venetian ambassador Domenico Trevisan wrote in his report to the Doge of Venice, "There are whispers in the palace that the daughter of the Grand Turk has been hidden or lost. Her mother does not appear before the court, and Rustam avoids all mention of her." It was the beginning of one of the most carefully silenced scandals in Ottoman history. And yet, the silence itself was a clue. For in the Ottoman world, disappearance was never accidental. It was deliberate. And when a sultan's daughter vanished, it meant someone wanted her erased. History teaches us that when empires hide their daughters, it's not out of grief, it's out of fear. If you're still watching, you'll want to see what happened next, because the trail left behind leads not to the palace, but to the sea. The Bosphorus has always kept secrets. It carries the weight of 2 continents, and the whispers of every empire that ruled its shores. 3 days after the wedding, fishermen near Uskudar reported seeing a strange procession at dawn, a small barge draped in black silk, moving silently toward the mouth of the Golden Horn. No banners, no guards. Only a single veiled figure standing at the stern. When questioned, one fisherman told the harbor master, "It bore the seal of the imperial house, yet no one spoke a word, only the sound of the oars." The report was logged, then vanished from official archives. But in 1867, during a restoration of the Ottoman State Archives, a fragment of that entry resurfaced. Vessel of the Inner Palace departed at the 3rd call to prayer, bearing unidentified passengers. Orders sealed by the Sultan's office. That fragment is all historians have, but it aligns with a pattern seen in other imperial disappearances. When someone of royal blood was to be removed quietly, they were not killed in the palace. They were taken to the sea. Across the water in Caracoy, an Italian merchant named Lorenzo Bragadin recorded a letter to his partner in Venice. There was much talk today among the Janissaries. Some say the Sultan's daughter has taken ill. Others say she has gone to the island of Marmara to recover from sorrow. But there are those who claim her chamber was found empty and her servants drowned. Drowned. The word reappears again and again in fragmented accounts from that spring. The Ottoman historian Petsevi wrote years later, "The sea does not lie. On certain nights, it carries the memory of the dead who were never buried." Meanwhile, inside Topkapi Palace, the Sultan's court moved as though nothing had happened. Official records of the week following the wedding are filled with decrees about trade, taxes, and military affairs. Not one mentions Mihrima. But something subtle changed in Suleiman himself. He stopped visiting the harem for several weeks, an absence his attendants described as a shadow upon the Padishah's soul. When he finally returned, he ordered the construction of a new mosque on the shore of the Bosphorus, one that would bear his daughter's name, Mihrima Sultan Kami, the Mosque of the Sun and Moon. To this day, it stands facing the sea. Architectural historians often remark on its strange design: two minarets where only one would have sufficed, windows that flood the interior with sunlight as if searching for someone who never returned. Was it a memorial or a confession? Ottoman chroniclers wrote that Suleiman built it as a gift of love for his daughter, but a few contemporary sources disagree. In a letter attributed to Hurrem Sultan herself, preserved in the Polish archives of Krakow, she writes, "Our daughter is beyond pain now, for the sea has taken her secrets. May the mosque that bears her name bring light to the darkness we have made." If authentic, it would be one of the few times a queen admitted guilt through architecture. Still, there are contradictions. European travelers decades later described meeting a princess in exile, living in Edirne under another name. A woman who resembled Mihrima, older, quieter, but unmistakably royal. Some said she survived and was hidden by her mother to escape Rustam's reach. If that was true, then the night of her disappearance wasn't death. It was escape. One mystery, two versions, both equally possible in a court built on illusion. The sea, it seems, had seen everything, but told no one. Some stories end where the evidence disappears, but this one only begins there. Stay with me, because the truth about Rustam Pasha and what he gained from her vanishing changes everything we think we know about Ottoman power. Power in the Ottoman Empire was never inherited, it was taken. And no one understood that better than Rustam Pasha. Born a peasant in Croatia, sold into the empire's service, he rose through the Devshirme system, the same practice that turned Christian boys into soldiers, statesmen, or slaves. He was brilliant, cold, and ambitious. The kind of man who knew how to survive in a palace where one wrong whisper could mean death. By the time he married Mihrima Sultan, he had already outmaneuvered rivals twice his rank. The marriage was his crowning victory, binding him directly to the bloodline of Suleiman the Magnificent. But after the night of the wedding, something changed. Rustam's behavior grew cautious, withdrawn. For weeks he avoided court gatherings, citing illness. Yet, while the empire mourned in silence, his power grew. Within a month of Mihrima's disappearance, he received the title Grand Vizier, the highest office in the land. Historians have long debated whether this promotion was coincidence or reward. In the Ottoman archives, an encrypted letter from Rustam to Hurrem Sultan was found among private correspondences. The matter has been contained. His Majesty's grief will pass, and our position will remain strong. You and I must act as the empire requires, not as our hearts desire. The phrase, "the matter has been contained," has haunted scholars for centuries. Was it reference to a scandal, a disappearance, or something far worse? The Venetian ambassador Navagero, always a careful observer, reported, "The vizier moves with greater authority than ever. His enemies fear him, his allies vanish, yet his face bears the mark of one who sees ghosts." Even within the palace, Rustem was feared. His reforms were ruthless. He purged the janissaries of disloyal officers, exiled 2 rival viziers, and increased the empire's wealth by seizing estates in the name of the crown. Some of those estates, historians later discovered, once belonged to Mihrima's attendants. One was found dead near the palace baths, her name erased from every record. But beneath his control, cracks began to show. Letters from his private physician, Dr. Sharafeddin, reveal that Rustem suffered from nightmares, visions of the sea, and a voice that called him by name at night. In one account, the physician writes, "He would wake trembling, saying she stood by the window, silent, her veil wet with salt water." Superstition ran deep in the Ottoman world. To dream of the dead was to invite their vengeance. And in Rustem's case, the dreams grew more violent each year. By 1553, his relationship with the Sultan had fractured. Rumors spread that he had conspired in the death of Shehzada Mustafa, Suleiman's eldest son. Hürrem defended him publicly, but even she could no longer protect him from the emperor's suspicion. When Rustem was finally dismissed, witnesses claimed he left the palace without speaking a word. Yet within months, he was restored to power again, a sign that whatever he knew about the Sultan's secrets was too dangerous to suppress. So what was his secret? Some historians, like Professor Feridun Emechen, argue that Rustem used Mihrima's disappearance as leverage, a silence he could hold over both the Sultan and Hürrem. Others believe she was never truly gone, only hidden, her identity concealed for her safety after political betrayal. But a more chilling theory, buried in the private papers of the French Orientalist Joseph von Hammer, suggests that Rustem himself ordered her removal to secure his position. He sought to bind himself to the Sultan through grief rather than love. For a dead daughter is a father's wound, but a missing one is a father's chain. Whether he killed her, hid her, or helped her escape, no one can prove. But one truth remains. Every step of Rustem's rise was paved by her absence, and every night, as he slept, the waves outside his palace whispered her name. Empires are built on the bones of secrets, and Rustem's secret didn't die with him. Because years later, when the Sultan himself began to fade, a letter surfaced that turned the entire story on its head. Time erases many things, but ink has a way of surviving grief. In the final years of Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire was vast, powerful, and haunted. His armies ruled from Budapest to Baghdad, yet inside the aging Sultan's heart, something remained unresolved. It wasn't the wars, it wasn't his fading health, it was his daughter. After her disappearance, Suleiman had forbidden any public mention of Mihrima Sultan. But he never destroyed her memory. He simply hid it. Among the private papers discovered in Topkapi Palace's treasury room in the early 20th century, historians found a set of sealed correspondences marked only with the Sultan's personal tukhra, his imperial seal. One of them was addressed, curiously, not to a vizier, not to an ally, but to the keeper of the Western Wing. Inside that envelope was a letter written in Suleiman's own hand, dated 1555, 16 years after Mihrima's wedding. The night the sea swallowed the moon, a father lost his light. They said she was gone, but I have heard her name whispered in the wind that touches my gardens. Tell her, if she still walks this earth, that her father has forgiven all that was done and all that was hidden. It is not signed with his title, not Suleiman the Magnificent, but simply Baba. That one word has become one of the most studied fragments in Ottoman historical research, because it suggests that Suleiman did not believe his daughter was dead. The Kakar, keeper of the western wing, was likely the official responsible for maintaining the outer quarters of the harem, a post later occupied by a man named Ayyubi Mehmed Aga, who left behind an even more cryptic note in his personal journal. The one who was lost has been seen. She lives under another name, far from the court, yet her prayers reach these walls. That line, under another name, appears again in a secondary document found in the Suleymaniye Library, catalogued as MS 2452, written decades later by a Sufi chronicler. It tells of a woman known as Leyla Hatun of Edirne, who lived quietly, funded schools and soup kitchens, and refused all visitors who mentioned the palace. Her patron? A woman whose eyes were said to hold the sorrow of a sultan. No record confirms it was Mihrima. Yet, the dates, the geography, and the name Layla, meaning night, align too perfectly to ignore. If true, it means she escaped. That Hurrem, who understood how to manipulate fate itself, arranged her daughter's disappearance not as punishment, but protection. It would explain why Rustam Pasha's career never fully recovered, why Hurrem's influence began to fade after the 1540s, and why Suleiman's final poems carry themes of forgiveness, loss, and reunion. In one of his ghazals written near the end of his life, he confesses, "The garden blooms, but my rose is gone. Still, I water the soil where her footsteps once fell." To historians, it is poetry. To those who read between the lines, it is a father's last confession. The letter, the poems, and the silence that followed form a fragile thread, one that ties back to the night of the wedding and the woman who vanished to save herself. If she truly lived on under another name, then her disappearance wasn't tragedy. It was transformation. Sometimes history's greatest secrets are not written in blood, but in forgiveness. But the story doesn't end with Suleiman's sorrow. Because after his death, someone returned to Istanbul, and the final piece of the mystery surfaced where no one expected it, in a tomb. The Bosphorus has a way of keeping secrets. It carries them in its current, between the Black Sea and the Golden Horn, whispering stories of palaces, betrayals, and those who were never meant to be found. Centuries after Mihrima Sultan vanished, the empire she left behind had already fallen. The palaces stood as museums, their halls stripped of voices, their shadows emptied of power. And yet, in 1924, an architect working on the restoration of the Mihrima Sultan Mosque in Üsküdar discovered something buried beneath the marble courtyard. A sealed crypt, unrecorded, unnamed. The mosque itself was famous, one of the jewels of Ottoman architecture, commissioned, according to records, by Mihrima Sultan, daughter of Suleiman, in the mid-16th century. But this crypt was not part of the original blueprints by Mimar Sinan, the imperial architect. It appeared later, concealed within an unmarked alcove facing the sea. Inside were fragments: a lock of dark hair preserved in resin, a pendant engraved with the Ottoman crescent, and a small silk pouch embroidered with one word: Layla. It was sent to the Topkapi archive, where it still rests today, labeled only as Object 11B 153. The report mentions that the silk was woven in Edirne, dating precisely to the 1560s, the same region and decade where the mysterious Leyla Hatun was said to live. But there was something else. The tomb's design was not imperial. It was humble, almost monastic. The woman buried there had no royal markings, no insignia of power, only a single inscription carved into the inner stone wall: "Forgiven by the one who ruled the world." No name, no title, only that phrase. Some historians dismiss it as coincidence. Others believe it was a quiet act of reconciliation, a final resting place arranged after Suleiman's death, perhaps by his son, Selim II, honoring a promise his father could never keep in life. Whatever the truth, the evidence, the name Layla, the Edirne silk, the poetic inscription, ties back to one story: a bride who vanished on her wedding night. Her disappearance reshaped the power within the harem, fractured the Sultan's family, and inspired legends that crossed generations. But beneath the layers of intrigue, politics, and betrayal, one truth remains hauntingly human. It was never just about the empire. It was about a father and his daughter, separated by the very walls he built to protect her. Today, when the evening call to prayer rises over Üsküdar and the last light falls across the mosque that bears her name, the locals say the air changes for a moment, soft, cool, and salt-sweet from the Bosphorus. They say if you listen carefully, you can still hear the faint rustle of silk and a whisper that carries across the water. Tell him I forgave him too. If this story of power, love, and disappearance moved you, you can explore more forgotten truths buried in the Ottoman archives, stories of those history tried to silence. Subscribe to Tortured Past, where every secret has a heartbeat, and the past never truly rests.